Hi, it's Conor Svensson here, founder and CEO of Web3 Labs. This is a conversation I had with Eugene Aseev. Eugene is the co-founder and CTO of Chainstack, one of the leading managed blockchain services providers. They support the major public as well as enterprise protocols, including Ethereum, Bitcoin, multi-chain, Fabric, and Corda, and more recently have also added support for Binance Smart Chain and Polygon. In this conversation, we start by discussing the origin of Chainstack and how it came to be, and also touch on how their products and services have evolved over the years and some of the biggest engineering challenges they've faced as an organization. Prior to Chainstack, Eugene worked in cybersecurity, where he worked for a number of leading firms, including Acronis and Kaspersky Labs. Eugene Aseev, great to have you here.
Hi, Connor. Pleasure to be here.
So you're the CTO of Chainstack. Chainstack are one of the leading platforms providing managed blockchains. I'd love to learn more about how Chainstack started and kind of the whole origin story there, because you've been around for a long time now. You support a lot of different protocols, but it's no doubt been a journey to get to where you are.
Right. We'll be happy to share the history. So it started around 3 years ago. And the reason we started Chainstack was because me and my co-founder, we were actually building an Ethereum-based solution in a company called Acronis, which is a cybersecurity company. And at that time, we tried to apply blockchain on data protection. So we basically were building a solution that was doing trusted timestamping on different blockchains. We started with Bitcoin, then moved to Ethereum, then optimized a lot so that, let's say, each time you timestamp a file and metadata of a file, you don't create a transaction because they got expensive that time already. During the time we were building the solution, we experienced a lot of issues with the blockchain nodes. So we actually ran our own nodes. We ran Geth, we ran Parity. And at that time, it was not really stable, so we had to switch between different clients all the time. And once Geth was not available, we switched to Parity and vice versa. And it was basically a pain in the ass at that point of time. So we decided to start a new project. And this new project was basically to solve this blockchain infrastructure problem for developers, right? So we thought, okay, the blockchain market will be huge and there will be a lot of people developing stuff on different protocols. So let's build a platform for these guys so that they can use Chainstack in the same way they use AWS for Web2 development or any other cloud provider for Web2 development. And I should say that what's cool about Chainstack in particular, we started it a few years ago, but we already were like multi-chain, multi-cloud back then. And what we see now is unfolding beautifully, especially in Ethereum ecosystem, that we have multiple chains already. And if you want to be a provider of any kind of services in the space, you have to be multi-chain, because we have networks currently like Ethereum and Polygon and Optimism and many others launching that basically provide different value propositions for this ecosystem. And they're all, let's say, EVM compatible in this context. And hence, if you want to provide any service, you kind of have to provide services in for all these blockchain networks. And that's what we envisioned like 3 years ago, which I'm basically very proud of. And that's what we are currently executing in the same way that we did a few years ago.
And do you think in that time it's actually got any easier for people to actually work with spinning up networks and so on, or is it just as hard as it ever was?
I think it's now to some extent it's simpler because the clients are more mature, they are more stable. So for instance, if you're running Geth today, you would not experience the issues that you would have like 3 years ago, and it has much more like stability, much more performance improvements, much more features focused on the let's say faster sync, etc. But at the same time, the ecosystem grew that big that you first of all, you don't only run a node, you have to run different components as part of your like the solution. So you have like databases like the graph, for instance, database solutions that provide you index data. and many others, like to debug your applications or to develop your applications as well. So this ecosystem became really complicated. So managing all this for developers is not an easy task today. So on one hand, it became much nicer since then because of these improvements in the software in general. But on the other hand, the whole ecosystem is much broader now, much more sophisticated. So in order to figure out, let's say, how to build applications on all these different networks and all these different protocols by applying all these different tools, it's much more challenging now for developers.
And this is something that you guys, I mean, of course, at one level, you provide the automation to help people spin up this infrastructure, but then another part of that is also providing the guidance to help them know where they should actually be trying to, you know, what platforms they should be working with. And so presumably this is an area that you guys have invested a lot of time into as well, just to ensure people are selecting the right platforms for the right opportunities.
Yeah, that's what we are really passionate about, because we want to provide access to all leading and all not only leading today protocols, but also most promising protocols that might be leading like in some time in 3, 6, 8 months. So we try to be like early adopters of all these protocols. So for instance, when we started working with protocols like Corda, we were first managed service provider for Corda. When we started working with Ethereum, it was already kind of late-ish in this ecosystem because it started quite early. Obviously, when we supported Bitcoin, it was already a few years in the making. And we also have this enterprise blockchain report, which we issue now every year, starting from last year, where we basically try to follow the trends of development of each enterprise protocol, to see like what's the trend like for each protocol going forward. So we try to predict a little bit like what would be the ecosystem size and what would be the adoption of each protocol, because we are providing services for all of them. So we obviously, as a company, we also manage our resources in a way that we try to put as much effort and as much resources as we can to support the protocols that need support today, and they will need support like in 3-6 months from now, right? So that's why, having said we are multi-chain, we also do all this balancing all the time between like putting more effort on the, let's say, enterprise blockchain, so putting more effort on the public blockchain. So we always try to keep the balance and hear the market, what market needs, and what people are building today at large.
And for you as a company, do you feel that, as you said earlier, there's an explosion of the number of different platforms, but do you think it's getting easier now to actually get people on the right track because of platforms that you've supported for a long time, like Bitcoin, multi-chain, Corda, Fabric, and Ethereum variants? They've got a degree of maturity there, or do you think it's actually getting harder because all of a sudden there's like these newer entrants, like recently you added support for Binance Smart Chain and also Polygon, both public Ethereum sort of scaling solutions, so to speak. But it'd be interesting to hear what you think.
Yeah, obviously the more protocols you have, the harder is to navigate, right? Because if you think about I don't know, some traditional software and developers choosing software for their applications, let's say you have databases. If only we had only one database flavor, right? We had MySQL, and you could just use MySQL. Everybody would be just using MySQL. But today, what we have like MySQL, and not only MySQL, but PostgreSQL, and which is kind of same flavor of relational databases, but there are plenty of differences, and you have non-relational databases, etc. So for developers, each time they basically build a solution, they need to go through this path of choosing the right stack and choosing the right tools, right? So in the same way, it's developing, I think, in the blockchain space. So we have different tools for different needs, and they have different value proposition, right? In the same way as you have like relational databases and non-relational databases, they have totally different value proposition. They are focused on totally different things. So in the same way, I think all these all these protocols work in a way. So obviously it became more complicated for developers to decide. I think for users it's a bit more straightforward. Users basically follow the value, they follow the apps, or they follow the money, or they follow the trading volume. So for users it's a little bit more easier. I think for developers it's obviously more complicated, because when previously you had just one Ethereum to build, it was straightforward. Now you have like Ethereum and 5 side chains and 10 roll-up solutions, and you always need to catch up with this industry, and you always need to know what's the difference like between different L2 solutions, right? To choose, okay, how do I build my next application, or how do I scale my current application? So obviously it became more complicated with this regard.
And do you think that there's an end in sight for these kind of complications, and that there'll be a consolidation phase soon, or do you think that it's going to stay like this for a while still?
I'm sure that as in any new industry, basically the strongest will survive, and those protocols that could not get the adoption, they will just eventually be out of the game. So I'm sure that I'm not like that familiar on the history of databases, but I'm sure when a database as a concept was created, there was a lot of other different approaches to databases, and there were like graph databases which still exist, right? And there were many other databases which didn't survive until today. And now we have like maybe 2 or 3 flavors of databases that exist and that are being adopted and being used like at scale. So I think pretty much the same will happen with blockchain protocols, because for them it's even more important that they get adoption and that they have like developer demand. Because if the protocol doesn't get a developer demand, unlike software, it also has monetary incentives, right? So if the protocol doesn't get enough attention from developers, from users, the monetary traction will also go down, and eventually nobody will be interested in this protocol. So I think for protocols, it's even more sensitive topic rather than just software, because they have different parameters, not just like adoption as a software, but also adoption as a, let's say, as a token, whether it's like a governance token or utility token. So I think yes, the history will repeat in this case, I'm sure, and we'll basically live with still number of protocols. It will be not 1 protocol or 2 protocols. It will be a number of protocols, but it will be definitely limited, and will not be like 50 protocols that we're going to use on a daily basis.
If we look back 12 months ago to it was kind of pre this big growth we've seen in cryptocurrencies, DeFi, NFTs, and everything else. As an organization, like if you look back 12 months ago, I know historically you had supported public Ethereum technology, but it seems like more recently it's become much more prominent part of your public offers anyway, and no doubt strategy behind the scenes. Looking back 12 months ago, were you in a very different place in terms of your outlook, in terms of more enterprise focus, or did you kind of have some inklings that there might be some more public chain type things that you'll need to get behind? Because obviously a lot has changed in this last 12 months.
Yeah, that's a really cool question, because there's a lot of going on, and maybe I can share some details on this inside Chainstack for this, because we were historically open to all blockchains. So we were not anyhow maximalist on any front. So we were like, okay, let's just embrace this technology, and let's see how we can help all these communities to build things, right? So that was our mojo since we started. And with my co-founder Laurent, we always had this sort of tension. So I was more like on the public blockchain side, and he was always more like on enterprise blockchain side, because he's been like in enterprise sales for 20 years, and I've been working with the like developers. So I was like, okay, I like these public blockchains because they are like open and decentralized. I still like enterprise blockchains because as an engineer, I totally understand the value that you can build in a let's say secure permissioned environment. So it definitely has a value. So and we always had this sort of like tension inside where I was pushing more like public blockchain side, and Laurent was pushing more the enterprise blockchain side. But we never wanted to like choose one, because we were, in this sense, again, quite opportunistic. So we just wanted to support all the builders on all those platforms whenever they get adoption. As having said that, 1 year ago, I was definitely still very optimistic on the public blockchain side, as I like it very much. So I was always sure that, I mean, of course it had waves, but maybe 1 year ago I was already quite assured that it will grow. But I don't think I understood the volume of growth, because I think what happened for last 6 months is quite unprecedented, and the number of let's say new applications that emerged, the number of accounts that were created across all these chains, I think it's quite unprecedented. So I think I always believed in it, but I would never thought that we are here today, like in June 2021, and we see this like rocket-fueled growth to some extent.
Yeah, it is crazy what's happened there, and no doubt, like yeah, I guess there's a lot of very hard engineering problems behind the scenes that you've had to solve. Given your role in the organization, are there specific ones that come to mind in terms of what you're most proud of that your team has been able to achieve? Because it is still hard to get these things right when you're setting up networks. There's a lot of like low-level details that need to be correct in terms of firewall rules, like network routes, and so on and so forth, as well as the actual infrastructure. And so the fact that you guys automate all this stuff, there must be some really big challenges that you've had to overcome there.
Yeah, so I'd say that there are two major challenges that we experience on a daily basis. One is automation, right? Is how to make things self-service, how to make things being accessed by people without any interaction required from like Chainstack team. So we try to make, because again, we see like explosive growth for last few months, so we cannot allow things to be manual, right? Because imagine like you were working on AWS, and each time somebody spins up a new virtual machine, like you need to ask some engineer to go and spin up a virtual machine. It would be impossible, right? So yeah, so this is definitely a challenge all the time, because we automate everything by default, but still there are things here and there that are sort of in the backlog that still need to be automated. So that's like ongoing challenge all the time. I cannot say that let's say we just like build it and it works. So we always need to like monitor the infrastructure. We always need to like change auto-scaling rules, etc. So we have a lot of operational load still, and this is even considering that we have, I don't know, 90% of our work automated. So we still have a lot of things to do on the rest of the 10%. The second, I would say, is reliability, because that's what we provide, right? That's our value proposition. It sounds extremely boring, especially in the blockchain space, but that's exactly what people need. And by talking to customers for the last 3 years, that's generally speaking the only thing that our customers that they expect from Chainstack. They want us to provide them 100% reliable services, so that when they set up a WebSocket connection, it never breaks. When they set up a network, it never fails. And so on and so forth. So the reliability is like the cornerstone of our value proposition. So here again, it's very challenging to be reliable consistently, and we invest a lot of time and efforts and resources in that, with regards to the uptime, with regards to security, to backups, etc., to like load balancing of important things, and so on and so forth. So we invest a lot of time in reliability, because this is the major thing that our customers expect from us, not being like fancy platform, or not being like having like a pink UI or something like that. So the only thing that our customers expect from us is come to Chainstack, deploy what they want, get an API, insert it into the app, and absolutely forget about Chainstack forever and just pay some like affordable amount of money to Chainstack so that it always works. So that's what our value proposition is. And this is what we deliver. And this is obviously a challenge all the time because we need to take care about all these things related to reliability.
And of course, that's one of the central promises of blockchain is that it provides this kind of constantly available network. So it's yeah, I guess adds additional pressure to yourselves in that regard.
Exactly.
And with those customer conversations, have many of them, have you found that started to get more and more interested in the public blockchain type activities? Because with your more recent offers, has that been driven from, well, perhaps you're not able to say, but has it been driven? I'd be interested to know if it's been driven more from institutional demand, or it's more like you're getting smaller projects coming and speaking to you. Who's pushing for it?
So I think that like the last wave of growth that we've had with protocols like Polygon, Binance Smart Chain, and Ethereum obviously comes from two sources primarily. The first source is those guys who were previously building on Ethereum, right? So there were a lot of applications on Ethereum built during the last few years. And now they are also looking for ways to scale to different networks, to different layer 2 solutions. And that's first source of growth for us. So these are the existing customers that we had, and they were building with Ethereum, with Chainstack, or there are apps that were not using Chainstack, but they need to scale into solutions like Polygon, and like Chainstack is #1 provider for Polygon nodes and APIs, so they come to us. So this is first source of growth. Second source of growth is definitely new projects, right? That sort of build already on these layer 2 solutions, all right? So they are younger projects, and there are plenty of them because they also see the growth of the ecosystem. They are engaged. They want to build something as well. They want to build something unique, or they just want to, let's say, replicate the success of certain application on other blockchain, right? So I'd say these are two major sources of growth for us. So existing applications, very well known, that have been popular on Ethereum for a long time, and now they move to other chains, and they need support on other chains as well. And that's where our multi-chain, let's say, strategy and multi-chain module plays really well, because we didn't do anything specific to support multiple chains. We were always like, okay, guys, we will support any chain that is used, that you need, and that's why naturally people come to us, because they see, okay, why would I use 3 different platforms? I would rather use one which supports like Ethereum and Polygon and Binance Smart Chain and Bitcoin, and they kind of see that, okay, since they support all of them today, whenever the new chain will emerge, they will also support it. So that's also a promise that we kind of make without explicitly making it, because it's sort of obvious from our like statement and value proposition as well.
And are there specific protocols that you have on your roadmap that you're planning, or at least seriously considering bringing on? Obviously, earlier on you mentioned optimism as in a passing comment.
Yeah, we have a few, but unfortunately I cannot disclose all the names today.
Yeah.
Maybe the only name that I can share today is the Graph, because we've worked with the Graph for a long time. Actually, 1 year ago, when the Graph testnet launched, we were one of the providers that indexers on the Graph network were using for basically to connect to Ethereum network. So we had a really big spike last summer with the Graph community when they started using Chainstack for the indexer software. So recently we had a grant from the Graph Foundation to basically develop the automation for the Graph deployment. That's what we're working now, and that's what we also gonna productize, and we're gonna provide like subgraph as a service. So this is something that I think is quite public already, so we can share it. As for the protocol plans, we have a couple of EVM-based protocols in the pipeline, and also a couple of non-EVM-based, which is even more interesting because like if you because that's what we can do, since we started with the combination of absolutely different protocols. So for us, adding even a non-EVM protocol is possible because, like, from day one, we supported EVM-based protocols, like Bitcoin-based protocols, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and others like Corda and Fabric that have completely different architecture. So for us, adding a non-EVM protocol is also like not easy, I would say, but our architecture allows this to do it without like dramatic changes in the system architecture. So yeah, we have a couple of non-EVM protocols in the pipeline as well.
And so certainly, with you mentioning the graph, they provide data services on top of blockchain, so to speak. And do you think that you'll continue to kind of find partners to work with there, or do you think there's you might start investing further up the stack as as a company yourself? Because no doubt, I'm sure customers are saying to you, "It's great that we've been able to deploy this network, but it'll be we've still got to go through all this technical work of actually getting smart contracts written or getting these decentralized apps written. Could you simplify that stuff for us?" So do you envisage that there might be changes down the line, especially when you see things like the explosive growth of NFTs as well, which is from a technical perspective, they're quite straightforward to implement?
Yeah, great question. For us, it was always, again, a question whether we should grow, let's say, in depth, or we should grow more like horizontally. So we should either like support more features on a given protocol, or we should support more protocols, right? And it was always a question, and like we refine the roadmap all the time, and we always question ourselves like whether we want to go in depth, or we just support more protocols. And I can say it's like there's like one clear answer to this question, because we always decide, right? Every time we plan our next milestones, we decide whether we go more, let's say, application level, or we go more infrastructure level. And so far, we've had enough work to do mostly on the infrastructure level, and that's where we understand that we're experts, and our expertise is very unique. And what we do for, let's say, for in-depth, but first of all, we have a Chainstack marketplace that has a lot of different tools and services that can be used together with Chainstack to also develop applications to achieve other goals, like have better trading boards, etc. Because we have a lot of advanced customers who let's say have algorithmic trading software running on our nodes as well. So this is one. This is something that you can use out of the box. So if you go to Chainstack Marketplace, you can use tools written by other companies, whether they are open source or not, and you can use them in conjunction with Chainstack. As for, let's say, development services, right? So you mentioned, like, if a company approaches us and asks, okay, can you guys help us to develop this smart contract? For this, we have our professional services team, which is, again, mostly focused on the infrastructure part. And for the application part, we have a wide network of partners around the world who help us to deliver the projects end to end, who are experts in building, let's say, smart contracts, who are experts in building like front end, mobile apps, and so on and so forth. So we obviously quite frequently have requests on, okay, guys, we have this idea of a project. Can you help us to build it? So what we usually do in this case, we basically find a right partner for this particular application or use case, and then we work together with this partner to deliver the end-to-end result. We are mostly responsible for the infrastructure part, and our partner is responsible for the application side. So
you've got that kind of coverage through your partnerships as well, beyond what you do there.
We try to focus on what we do the best, and what we do the best is clearly infrastructure, and we want to focus on it. But having said that, we always adding like value-added things on top of infrastructure, which might be not directly, like, let's say, application related, but they help to build applications, right? So for instance, what we do, what is quite unique in this space, for instance, we provide GraphQL API on top of our public nodes, which I think no other provider does. And this allows our customers to build applications in more efficient fashion, because you don't need to use like JSON or RPC, but you can use GraphQL, which allows you to do more flexible queries, etc. So we provide value-added service for developers, but again with some sort of infrastructure flavor. So we like provide better APIs, different APIs, more options for APIs, like more security options as well for the API. So let's say you can use like basic authentication for our endpoints, or you can use like token-based authentication. So we always try to think about value-added features, but we so far tend to stick with something around the infrastructure. So not going directly into smart contract domain, because we know that there are a lot of like brilliant teams building there, and we understand that they have this expertise, and we rather work with them, we rather complement them, we rather integrate with them, rather than we start building totally different, let's say, toolkit for like building smart contracts. So that's been our strategy. I think it will be pretty much the same moving forward.
So that sounds good, and we look forward to going from strength to strength. I mean, I'm interested to get your views in terms of, you know, we've seen kind of the evolution of course, originally cryptocurrencies, tokens, and more recently DeFi and NFTs have had another resurgence. What do you think is kind of next in terms of the growth area for the technology, whether it's going to be like a new kind of exploitation of the technology, or just, you know, it's something else? I'd love to hear what you think.
So honestly speaking, I think that like DeFi's and NFT, they haven't even started realizing themselves, to be honest. So let's say why DeFi hasn't started, because I mean, I have a quite wide network of people of different like interests and domains that I'm talking to, and apart from like my blockchain, let's say, part of community, nobody else has any idea of existence of some sort of decentralized finance that they can go and they can lend and they can borrow things and they can use their own like sort of PC to do that. So I'm sure it's just the tip of the iceberg. So nothing happened yet in DeFi, to be clear. It's just, I think we have this idea, like you and me, because we're in this space for such a long time, and we see, okay, DeFi is like growing crazy. But to be clear, if you go just outside and you start talking to people about DeFi, they will think that you are absolutely crazy, that you like have some money in your computer and you like transfer money somewhere and you like can lend this money from the computers. So it sounds absolutely crazy. So I think we haven't seen this, like DeFi is just starting and it's just very early beginning. Same for NFTs. NFTs are a bit more, let's say, they've received much more publicity recently, so I think there are more people generally talking about NFTs. But again, I think the potential hasn't been realized even for like 1%. So I think that's what we are heading for. So I think there will be more or less mainstream adoption happening for next, I don't know, 20 years gradually. So the same with the internet, like it was very gradual process. I think it was never like one day everybody's on the internet. It took like, I don't know, 20 to 30 years for most of the planet to be on the internet. I think it will be exactly the same. For blockchain, it will not happen overnight. So one area that I'm pretty excited about, which is very, very new, is DAOs. So I think that DAOs has a lot of potential. I observe and I see how they work, and I think it's a very interesting way of organizing the way people work together and they make decisions. So I think this is something that I think it's a very complicated area. So it's not, I mean, there are no rules. There are probably no like best practices there yet. So but I think it has a lot of potential, which is even further than like DeFi and NFTs, because it has more consequences rather than, okay, you just basically buy let's say a GIF on the blockchain and then you sell GIF on the blockchain. But it has much bigger implications on our like society, on people, on the ways companies work, on the ways companies work with individuals, etc. So I think it's very interesting area to look after, and I think nothing happened there again. So I think it's just starting. So we have just a few examples now. They're shaping up. Probably they will reshape in the next like 5 years completely. So we'll probably see completely different DAOs in 5 years than we see today. But I personally think it's very, very interesting area to look after.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on DAOs. I feel that, you know, that there was obviously the high-profile DAO hack all those years ago, but the ability to recreate really any structure that really has human relationships or, you know, capital in it is phenomenally powerful. And as long as you have those right protections in place, then I think that you know, that's going to be key for that. That's sort of great.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I know you've covered obviously that you've got some exciting things on the horizon. You know, Chainstack as well. You've got some fantastic reports that you put out regularly too. But just in terms of, you know, wrapping things up here, are there any you know, if people want to keep up with, you know, what you're up to, you know, what's the best way to follow you? Is it, you know, is it via social, or is it, you know, keeping an eye on what Chainstack's up to?
Yep. So we have quite growing like social media channels, which is largely Twitter and LinkedIn. Feel free to subscribe on us. We publish all the new developments, all the reports, all our let's say technical blogs that we publish quite a lot of. Also, once we figure out something interesting about, like analyzing transaction pool on Ethereum, or again, like how to have much more efficient queries on GraphQL, on blockchain nodes, etc. So we have quite a lot of technical content as well, since we are, again, we're working with developers a lot, so we're getting a lot of feedback and information from that. We also recently launched our Discord and Telegram channels. We're probably late to the party because it was
normally it's the other way around.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you have a company.
Yeah, so we again, as a boring blockchain company, we just realized that, okay, because we used Gitter as our communication channel with developers, and it clearly doesn't work. So it's like it worked for things like boot camps pretty well, because on boot camps you have people who are more or less like 100% developers. Well, if it's a developer boot camp, so they all have like GitHub, GitLab accounts, so for them it's easy to join this kind of developer-oriented platforms. But for non-developer kind of people, or for those who are like not committing things to GitHub every day, it's not very natural way to communicate through some like developer-oriented platforms. So that's why we're launching this. We launched this like a couple of months ago. So yeah, they're all on our website in the footer. So whenever you want to talk to us, feel free to go there. And we also have a pretty cool newsletter that we send at least once a month. We never spam people with frequent updates, but whenever we have something interesting or something important to share, we do this. We have quite a lot of subscribers there. It's probably more than 20,000 already. So yeah, that's probably the ultimate way to keep up with what we're building on a non like paranoid fashion, which is more like social networks, when you basically subscribe and you see all the latest news immediately. Is probably the newsletter, because you get all the updates on a regular basis, but not too frequent.
Awesome. Well, Eugene, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up, and yeah, look forward to seeing the new protocols coming on board and continuing to see you guys grow.
Thank you, Conor. It was amazing to talk.